Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining the ACS Methods session. We're so glad to have you join our conference and this session in particular. I'm Tricia Ruiz. I'm with the ACS Data Users Group Steering Committee, and I also work for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And I'm excited to share our presenters here. We'll be starting off. I'll do a quick intro of each presenter, and then we'll start off with Hillary. So we have Hillary Steinberg here from the U.S. Census Bureau. And Hillary will be presenting, she's from the Methods Panel Coordination Branch at the Census, and she's going to be presenting her and her team's work on designing and testing experiments to improve survey response. After Hillary, we will have Dorothy. We may have some technical issues with Dorothy at the moment. We might put her towards the end, but she will present as soon as she can get on, and she'll be presenting her work on the administrative records data used in the ACS. We have, sorry, for the second presentation, we're actually going to have Benjamin, sorry for the confusion, from the Census Small Area Modeling and Development Branch, and sharing the works on the Bureau's planning database and future updates. And our final presenter will be Luke Larson from the Census Bureau, who will present his team's work on revising and improving the low response score. And I just want to say I'm very excited about this. We get to see the wizards behind the curtain, the work that goes on with the data that we use every day. So I'll hand it off to Hillary.
All right, give me 1 second to launch the presentation. Share the screen. I can do that one. There's a lot of buttons. Okay. So, hello. My name is Hillary Steinberg. I am with the Methods Panel Coordination Branch, and today I'm talking about...
Can anyone hear us?
No, you can't hear me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh, okay. I guess I'll keep going. So I'm talking today about two experiments that we're running in order to improve response. Today we're mostly talking about the internet instrument, but also some mail out timing and messaging too. So why am I talking about two tests before we launch? So these are tests that haven't happened yet. They're going to be launched in the next few months. First of all, I think it's good to present research at all stages. A lot of time we get research at the end stage when everything's sort of analyzed and polished. And so here we were able to show how we think about testing improvements. I think that this is important for planning current and future research and working collaboratively. And also we're hoping to chart how we go from research questions to planning data collection and how that impacts decision making. In general, we're looking to have effective response rates, better data quality, and cost savings. I'm going to talk about two experiments today. One is the RED and one is the QTT. Those are both acronyms. I will tell you what they mean. So first is the RED internet test. RED stands for Response Option and Edit Message Design. This is an internet-only instrument test. We have one control and three treatments. The sampling means we're going to take the month of August and we're going to break down who gets what internet instrument by randomly assigning each group. So a fourth of people will get the control and 3/4 of people will get a treatment. So research questions? We're thinking about what changes we can make in order to support internet response. And this also includes mobile response, which is increasingly how a lot of people answer. And we want to make sure that we are improving that response. So for answer fields, right now, if you know the ACS, there's a really small button that you have to click into for the answer fields to check off something. So if you want to say that you have an electric vehicle, which we've been talking about a lot today, you have a pretty small button to click, and it's even smaller if you're on a mobile phone. With errors, there are ways that we do the errors now that might be kind of confusing, that might not be clear. So for example, if you trigger multiple errors, we give them all to you in the big same box at the top. This might lead to item non-response or frustration, break off if we're not clear about where the error is and how to guide respondents to answer. So experimental design. We have the control, which is just the ACF format, no impact to screens, nothing's happening. To be clear, I'm not talking about questions, I'm talking about screens. So you see a lot more screens because rostering especially gets broken up. You got unfolding. So I know there are less questions than this, but we were counting every screen. So for answer fields, we had about 130 out of 165 screens. Error messages is less than that. It's going to be 60.
Hillary?
Yeah.
Hillary? It looks like your slides are not advancing at the moment. Yeah, if you could just put it in presenter mode in advance, thank you so much.
I think it is in presenter mode. I'm in presenter view. Is that the issue? What do you see right now?
So right now we just see it not full screen.
Not full screen.
We see a preview of your slides on the left and then your notes at the bottom. And we are on the red. Okay, now we're on the control and treatment slide. Yep.
All right, I'll try to remember what's in my notes. Okay. Yes. So answer fields are going to be a lot more than error messages. That treatment 3 is going to have both. So we're going to have some questions that have both changes to the answer field and changes to the error messages. So I'm going to show you pictures to let you know how those changes look. So this is what the control looks like. This is what you currently get if you're filling out the ACS online. So on the left, you can see the button's pretty small, as we talked about. On the right, you can see that you get that banner at the top, and then you also get boxes that have a yellow background fill. Sometimes you get an arrow that pops up and tells you where to fill stuff in. So treatment 1 is answer fields. This includes both multiple choice questions, so something like, if you pay for electricity. And then it also has select all that apply options. So something like Hispanic, you can click more than one. And so the changes include an elongated box that's going to go the width of the question. It's going to show you what's clickable, which is everything in that elongated box with a dark green outline. It's going to shade light green when you select. Also,
Hi, Hillary. I'm so sorry to interrupt again. If you are able to, yeah, it looks like the slides are not advancing. If you're able to email me your slides, I know you have new ones, or I can just present
we can use
old
the
ones
previous
that you.
ones. That's
Okay, okay, great.
okay.
I will go to the treatment.
Okay. Okay. All right, so that was control. This is what it looks like now. So you have the small buttons. You got the edit messages. We can go to the next one. Okay, so we got the elongated box. We got the dark box around it, right? We have the light green shading. That's going to be true if you click in. It also is going to be true if you hover on a desktop or a laptop. There's not really a hover mechanism because that's not how fingers and screens work for like tablets or mobile phones. So that doesn't exist for them. And then also if the text wraps, you're going to get a vertically centered radio button that lines up. You can go to the next slide. Or I guess, can I do the slides? Let's see. Yeah. Okay. So this is what it looks like. As you can see on the left, we've got that really long screen that's going to be not hovered on yet. On the right, you're going to see that has an error message. The error messages and the error mechanisms are going to look the exact same as they do on the current ACS. And it only does like half shaded if you have a right inbox. Treatment 2 is going to do both edit messages, so the stuff you get in the banner, and then also the stuff you get when you trigger an error. So what happens when you trigger an error? Let's say you clicked into a race box and you didn't answer. When you hit next, it's going to have you have an arrow, it's going to get a box, and then it's going to have a banner on top. The banner on top we're changing in this treatment to be yellow. It only has a border on one side. We're taking out all arrows. The boxes are going to highlight with a dark yellow outline, nothing in it. The boxes don't trigger until you hit that to next page. So right now, when you click into a box, it's going to light up and get an error an arrow. Wow, those sound similar. That's not going to happen anymore until the second page, and then multiple edit messages get broken up. So you can see that here. We got the 2 edit messages, no arrows, and the different boxes. Let you look at that for a second. And then treatment 3 is both of those. So we have the changes to the answer fields and the changes to the errors. So you can see that here. You're going to have the bigger boxes. You're going to have the different banners, that kind of thing. So why are we doing this? What does it matter for? One, we're really trying to support internet response in general, and doing so is going to support data quality. A lot of times we get actually more accurate results when people do the internet instrument. More people are doing the internet response, and especially mobile response is becoming particularly important. There are a lot of kinds of people who are more likely to do mobile response. So younger people, people in group quarters, Hispanic Americans. And so it's important to make sure we're getting accurate data for them. This also, if you were here this morning, you heard about the DICE migration. So we are changing the platform that ACS is going into. And so part of why we're testing the errors the way we are is to make sure that these changes that are happening in the new platform work. And then there's also a lot of cost saving for response, especially internet specific. Okay, next is the questionnaire timing test, or QTT. This is the second experiment, completely separate experiment, related though. So project overview, we're looking at contact strategies for mailing without increasing cost. So there's 2 ways that we're looking at this. The first is adding a QR code. If you're familiar, if you've ever gone to a restaurant and you're like sad they don't give you a paper menu, you've probably scanned your phone and it pops up with a link. And then you have varying when the questionnaire on paper is being mailed. So this is also an experimental design, similar to RED. We're going to take a whole month and we're going to split it up by random sampling. This is approximate. We got 1 control, and then you got the 4 treatments. This is the control. It is the same as how we currently do mail out strategies. So you have these first 2, which are going to be the initial letter and the reminder letter. After that, you have non-respondents. So these are people who have not answered the ACS yet. They're going to get the questionnaire in the paper, and then you get a reminder, and then the remaining ones get a final reminder with a due date. If you still don't answer, you might be put into what we call the CAP universe, which means we might send an interviewer out to you. So treatment 1 is going to be the exact same timing, and it's going to be the same mail out strategy, except we're just adding a QR code. So this is also kind of de facto working as a control against the other treatments too. There isn't changes to messaging here. There is some shifting in how stuff looks because, like, spacing, if you've ever put a QR code in a Word document or like anything in a Word document, you know things are going to shift around. So the spacing looks a little different. Treatment 1, we're moving the questionnaire packet to the 4th mailing. So we're giving people more time to be respondents. If you see a red arrow, that means that the timing has changed for when we mail stuff out. If you see a red box, that means our messaging has changed. So for example, we're not telling people about the questionnaire in the first 2 mailings. And then you have this later questionnaire packet. For 3, you're going to have an even later questionnaire packet. You have a lot more time in between these mailings. And then you have this 5th postcard mailing that still has a due date at the end. The last one is doing the questionnaire last. It's the furthest we can push it, right? So you're going to have the first 2 don't talk about the questionnaire. You have some changes to messaging throughout. And then finally, you're also still going to get that due date, but you don't get the questionnaire packet till the end. This is an example of how things might look a little different. So this is treatment 1, which means it's just changing, putting in the QR code. We're not changing any of the messaging here, but you can see it looks a little different. So our research questions. For the QR code, we want to see what it does. Does it improve self-response? Does it improve the final response rates? Does it improve how much people actually fill out the ACS? Are there demographic differences for who does that? And is it cost effective? We want to know similar things about mail out timing. So we're looking at how it impacts things like cost, and it impacts things like response rates. Oh, the lights turned off. That's cool. And then we're also looking at what happens when you make the questionnaire later and later. What happens when you take out those references? Are there demographic distributions for who ends up doing the questionnaire versus not? That kind of thing. So why does this matter? One, we're looking at ease of access. Again, supporting mobile response is really important, and that's the main thing the QR is going to do. We also want to make sure that we are finding the best way to mail reminders and do this timing in order to better response. And hopefully, in general, if you're supporting internet response, you have less questionnaires, you have less people that you might have to send interviewers to, that you would be saving cost. So thank you so much. I'm sorry for the 12 technical difficulties.
And
now
we're
I'm just
sorry.
in the dark. It's fine.
No, we're so sorry, Hillary. You
Okay.
just seem to be the test guinea
It's
pig.
fine.
No, thank you
Hopefully
very much.
I got all of it. It's okay.
You did, and thank you. And again, sorry for the technical difficulties. For everyone, if you haven't, if you don't know already, we'll have the handouts available to share. And Hillary, we can provide those updated ones as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next on deck is Benjamin, who's going to be presenting on the census planning database and some future updates.
Yes, thank you, Tricia. I will. Okay, that's not the slide I want to start with. Let's go all the way back. Let's take it back to the beginning. Can everyone hear me? See the slides? We're doing good?
Yes.
Anyone in chat? Fantastic. All right. Set my little timer. All right. So yeah, I'm here today to present on the U.S. Census Bureau's planning database, talk about what it is, some of the unique variables that we have on it, and then talk about some of the new features that we're going to have on our new release, which will be coming out later in the summer, specifically late August right now. So for those not familiar with this amazing data product that I'm going to shamelessly promote, because my area creates it, produces it, and disseminates it. The planning database is the greatest hits of American Community Survey 5-year estimates, and then some really great, important, and unique 2020 census variables. We have a variety of different topics that are covered in the planning database. We have things related to the population, household characteristics, housing unit characteristics, and then even census operational data, which makes it particularly unique because we also have response rates and return rates. And we have this available at the census tract and block group level. And you cannot get that type of data anywhere else outside of the planning database. We also calculate percentages for each estimate, so it's not just a count. So sometimes when you download certain tables of data.census.gov, it may just be a count, but we do the percentages for you, release the margins of error as well. It's just a great tool. And we release this as downloadable comma delimited files, as well as through the API. So whatever your preference is. And as mentioned, it is a very unique data source in that we're not only putting out very popular ACS 5-year estimates, but we also have some very unique measures like ACS self-response rate, census operational statistics, which we'll go over, and then the low response score, which is a modeled predictive score to look at areas with low response. So how can you use the planning database? There's a number of different ways you can actually use it for your own purposes, but here are just some examples that might be particularly relevant. You can use it to examine expected survey completion rates at lower levels of geography. So let's say you are you're curious just about the response rates or return rates for the decennial census, or maybe you're just doing your own survey and you're using your local community and you want to know just generally what are the completion rates. This is a great way to look at it, particularly at those more granular levels of geography, tract level, block group level. You can also link the PDB data with spatial map data to create thematic maps. It's great for generating reports, cross-tabulation, simple analyses. Obviously, you can identify areas for special outreach and promotional efforts. So look at areas that either have low response or maybe there's certain alternative languages besides English that are spoken in the area. So you can do special outreach and promotional efforts that way. It helps with planning, interview administered surveys and censuses. And then it's just a great teaching source. So if you're teaching statistics, data science, sociology, demography, whatever it is, we have this great data set with all these important variables that are just ready for use. So it's a great educational tool for those who haven't considered it before for their own teaching purposes. All right, the history of the planning database. It's been used for planning field resources, tailored communication, and partnership campaigns during census and survey operations. So going back to 1990, the hard-to-count score was established. The 1990 census was used the HTC for hiring decisions and resource allocations. Between 2000 and 2010, they continued to use HTC, the hard-to-count score, to help identify areas for additional outreach and engagement. And then going into 2020 is when you saw the hard-to-count score be replaced with the low response score, which is much more of a modeled score, which I'll go over what some of the differences are a little later. But there was a transition from hard to count, which are kind of the hard to enumerate areas, to low response. That was used going into the 2020 census. And this is publicly released to stakeholders. So that's a nice thing about this, is that we're not just using it for our own census survey planning. We do release the low response score so that other users can use that metric as well. So why use the planning database? We do all the hard work for you. That's a big one, is that instead of downloading all these ACS files or combining these variables across different data tables and different sources, we kind of do that for you all in one area. As mentioned, we have some of the most popular ACS 5-year census tract and block group estimates. We also have decennial census data as well. So you're getting both ACS and the decennial census all in one data set. So that's nice. Contains unique operational statistics, as mentioned. We update this every year with the latest ACS data. And then we also will be using the Roam application, which is currently online, but it hasn't been updated for a while because there hasn't been a new vintage of the low response score in a while. But this application does make it very easy to use the planning database and to look at the variables on there, because we have hundreds of variables on these files. So the interactive tool known as Roam, which I'll talk about a little later, will be very helpful, and it makes it a lot more accessible for those that just want to know, what is the low response score for the area? What are some of the characteristics using some of the popular variables on the planning database? It's all there for you. Now, in terms of this upcoming release that we have this summer, we'll have a new intermediate version of the LRS. So this one is based on the 2020 census. So that'll be really nice and exciting for a lot of people that have been waiting patiently for that. We also crosswalk the Connecticut geographies and planning regions to 2020 decennial variables. If you're familiar, Connecticut went from counties to planning regions starting in 2022 data products. So this is the first time that this is incorporated into the planning database. And what we do is we actually crosswalk the decennial variables that were originally shown for the counties, but we crosswalk it to the tracts and the block groups, because it is a one-to-one match, but the FIPS codes do change, and this isn't currently available otherwise, so you kind of would have to do the crosswalking yourself. Again, we do the hard work for you. That's why the planning database is amazing. So that's a nice feature for those that want to look at things like percent rural for certain levels of geography. All right, so let's use an example of how you might want to use the planning database. Let's say you want to identify areas that may need support for a language other than English. What you could do is find block groups in the area that have a high percentage of housing units where no one over the age of 14 speaks English very well. And then you can also looking at that same universe, what is the language spoken in these block groups? So this is just an example in Harris County of a few block groups. Here we see there's a high proportion of housing units occupied housing units where no one age 14 in the house speaks English very well, right? 88% and higher across these block groups. And then when you look at the language, again, this is also a variable on the planning database. You want to see what it is. Actually, is Spanish is primarily what the other language is. Almost all the cases, there's a small percentage among the last block group that it's not Spanish, it's another language. But nonetheless, if you are planning a census, if you are planning a survey in these areas, you're going to need a field representative that speaks Spanish, not just English, given the language needs for the area. So this is, again, a great way to use some of the variables on the planning database for planning purposes. All right, so let's talk about some of the unique variables, and these are the unique variables that have already been released. So after this presentation, you can download the FY23 planning database file, and you'll have this at your disposal. One is the ACS self-response rate. This is the 5-year self-response rate for internet, paper, phone to the ACS. It's only available at the track level, so it's not on the block group level. But nonetheless, on the track level file, you will get the ACS self-response rates. And again, this is only available on the PDB, not on data.census.gov. And this is a percentage of households in the track that responded by internet, paper, or phone to the ACS. And this is aggregated over 5 years. So this is a 5-year estimate. It's just important to note that these rates don't include group porters. There's no rates for Puerto Rico at this time. And certain tracks that have smaller populations, or have a smaller number of households, I should say, we don't have self-response rates for some of those tracks. So continuing with operational statistics, but now going from ACS to 2020 decennial census, we also have some really important operational statistics there that are included on the planning database. Some examples: bilingual questionnaire, housing unit count. So again, that might be helpful in terms of how many households have received the bilingual English-Spanish materials. You can also look at internet self-response rates. And you can look at return rates as well. So again, you can look at things like mode, how they answered the survey. And then return rate is like a response rate, only return rates are just among occupied housing units. So whereas response rates will include those vacant housing units as well. If you want to look at just occupied housing units, you look at the return rate. So we have that information also available. And it's important to note here that the operational data that we have from the 2020 operational statistics, it does not contain noise-infused counts. So there's no noise injection. We were able to release this in a way without having any disclosure concerns. So that's a unique benefit too, if there's any concerns there. Here's just an example of the average self-response rates and return rates at the track and block group level. You see with self-response rates, they tend to be, between 65, 66%, depending on your level of geography. And then when you look at return rates, you're going to get a higher return rate because, again, you kind of remove those vacant housing units and you're only looking at occupied housing units. So there it's around 73 to 74%, depending on whether you're looking at tracks or block groups. All right, so that's currently available. You can download the FY23 file, but we're releasing the FY24 planning database file this summer. And that has some unique features, as mentioned before. Connecticut data products now use planning regions instead of counties for the first time. So we include the 2020 census variables that are now crosswalked to those planning regions. So that is kind of a nice thing that we do the crosswalking for you. The geographies, with the exception of like a number of water tracks, but water tracks don't have people, so that's not a big concern here. But the tracks and the block groups do line up 1-to-1, but the FIPS codes are different. So you'd have to do the crosswalking yourself, but we did the hard work for you, again, because we are awesome. So if you want to get things like percent rural and other things from the 2020 decennial census for these Connecticut areas, please use the planning database so that you don't have to do all that work yourself. And then finally, the big selling point for the planning database is the low response score. As mentioned, this is the successor to the hard to count score, which is more ethnographically oriented and identifies areas difficult to enumerate. But the LRS is a model-based approach, and it identifies areas predicted to have low self-response. specifically predicted rate of low or non-response to the decennial census. This is based on OLS regression of 25 PDB metrics upon the 2010 census mail return rate. And this is kind of the traditional model. Again, this is kind of being updated for the new release. But this is traditionally how it's been used for the previous low response scores that have been released. Values range from 0 to 100. You want a low response score because if it's a higher level, that means that the area has a pretty high low response. So that's going to make it more challenging. You can read about the methodology on Erdman and Bates 2017. And we're going to be updating this LRS with ACS 5-year estimates, which are used as predictors. We're going to be doing that on an annual basis, with each subsequent release. This is just a national distribution of the block group LRS. So again, rule of thumb, if the LRS score is above 30, we usually consider those hard to survey areas. So keep that in mind when looking at your local area. We'll be releasing the intermediate LRS, which is an updated LRS model that the LRS working group at Census has been working on. This includes new variables, new geographic interactions as well. So it's updated from the previous LRS. So you'll learn more about this at Luke Larson's presentation, which is part of this session. So please stick around for that. He'll give you some of the updates on what's changed compared to the previous LRS. But we will be releasing that on the next planning database vintage. And then finally, we will be updating the Roam Interactive Viewer with the updated FY24 PDB. Again, this is kind of an easy to use mapping tool. And you can use this through a web browser. You don't have to download anything. This will include the LRS along with other important variables on the planning database. All right, so that is my presentation. Thank you for having me. If you have any questions, please reach out to the group. You can scan the QR code if you want to go straight to the planning database because you're so excited after this presentation, which, I can't blame you. But yeah, if you have any questions, reach out. Otherwise, thank you for having me and enjoy.
Thanks so much, Benjamin. Okay, we're moving on to the next one. We have Dorothy Barth here from the census, and she's going to present the use of administrative records in the ACS. I'll hand it off to you. We don't hear you, Dorothy. It worked earlier. There we go.
Hear us?
Okay.
Thank
And
you.
you can see my screen. Cool. Okay. All right. So my name is Dottie Barth, and I'm going to be giving an overview and updates about administrative record use in the American Community Survey. My real goal is to be more excited about this than Benjamin was about the PDB. So here we go. Now, is this going to work? Okay. I'm going to give a discussion on admin records data, brief overview, review of our gates to implementation, the process that we go through to decide what we're going to use on the ACS, and some updates on what we've been doing currently. What are administrative records? They are data collected from government agencies to administer programs or provide services. So like if you go to get a driver's license, you're going to have to fill out some forms. That data becomes administrative records data, is filed somewhere, and can be used for other purposes. These data are distinct from the data that we obtain by collecting survey data under the authority of the Title US 13. Sometimes we also broadly refer to admin recs, but it's really vendor data or publicly available data, and I'll give some examples of that. We in the ACS, we use Social Security data, IRS tax form data. When we send out a mailing, it comes back undeliverable as addressed. We get from USPS, we get that data, the when and the why those mailings came back. We purchase phone number data and property data for different purposes. And one of our projects is now using USDA cropland data. So these are just some examples of the different data that we're using. Why use this data? We're obligated by law to use existing data instead of asking it on the survey. So we're completing that obligation. We're allowed to do it for statistical purposes, and it can reduce respondent burden and improve data quality if we have better data for non-responses and stuff like that. We have 3 phases to get to implementation. That's exploration, simulation, and implementation. And you can find this in our Agility in Action report, which I have a reference to it at the end of the slides. But since we now have a project in implementation, we've realized we need phase 4. We've got to continuously monitor this. So I'll talk about that in a few minutes. So the first gate is availability. Like, we know what topics are on the ACS. We know the mandated use for the topic, the product, and the geographical level that we publish the data. So now we're saying, okay, what ad rec are available that could maybe replace that? We look at what are the data sources, the years available, the geography, and things of this sort. But we also have to keep in mind there has to be a contract for this. What's the cost? Can they deliver it when we need it? Can it be linked to the ACS sample? So for housing data, that would be address, and for person data, person level data, that would be a personal identifier. After we've decided that, yeah, there's some good ad rec data available, then we have to ask the question, is it fit for use on the ACS? So when we're deciding that, we look at things like coverage. Is enough available at the low geography levels that we publish? Can we match to the ACS sample? That's the conceptual alignment we're talking about. Temporal alignment would be, sometimes an ACS question is in the last 12 months or last week, or, things of this sort. Does the ad rec data correspond to that reference period? Also, we cannot have any individuals or households being identifiable. So we want to make sure that there's enough data that would cover that. And we look at, are there risks over time with contract agreements, the timing of delivery, the quality of data, and things like this. Once we've passed this gate and we've decided, okay, this ad rec data that's available, it's fit for use. Then we have to decide, what is our path? How are we going to use it, and how are we going to prioritize that usage? So far, the 5 categories that you see here are the uses that we've thought of. I don't know if there'll be more in the future, but for now, we're optimizing operations is one use, taking the questions off the surveys, maybe taking the question off the survey for some people, not others. We may edit and impute missing responses, edit responses that we have if the ad rec data is better, and we can make new data products, perhaps. Oops, sorry about that. When we found a path and we present it to stakeholders, sometimes stakeholders would be different federal agencies who use the data. Sometimes it's internal SMEs. We tell them about our plans. We show them what we've done so far, and they're like, okay, we approve. After that approval process, we go to the simulation phase. When we simulate, what we mean is, for example, let's say the 2023 data. We would simulate what our idea would be to use the admin rec, the methodology, and we would compare that simulation to what happened in 2023. And then when we're in that comparison, we're asking ourselves questions like, do we reduce or increase non-response? Does this affect bias, reliability of data, downstream impacts, and stuff like this? So these are the research questions that we're asking. We present that research. And we also, at the end of this slide, you'll see some of the reports that we've written with those simulations. So we make that available to the public. Before we do an internal review, and we get obviously get approval internally and with stakeholders, but we also, before we can implement, we have to send OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, our idea in a package. We also send a Federal Register notice to the public. So we want a full disclosure, transparency, let the public know what our plan is, OMB. When that approval goes through, then we can implement. I'm not going to go through implementation because that just is how we operationalize the methodology that we came up with. So I'm going to skip implementation, but go to what I was talking about with continuous monitoring. So once a project's been implemented, we are going to monitor the business rules we created. Are they still okay? The availability and the quality of data, is it the same? Do we have a new contract? Is the quality the same? How is our modeling performing? What are the impacts on the survey data? Let's just keep monitoring, keep track of that. So we define metrics. We create reports from those metrics. Sometimes that'll be a dashboard that we can look at every day, every month. Sometimes it'll be an annual report. And we'll just continue that circular, continuous monitoring. And if something appears, we'll improve processes, make some tweaks, make some changes. But we're going to keep doing that. It's not one and done. We're using AdRec, and that's just the way it's going to be. The status of our current use. We have a couple of items in the exploration phase. Year built is the most promising, but we're also looking at other housing items to perhaps partially replace, and I'll talk about those later. In the simulation phase, we are simulating a farm indicator, which also touches agricultural sales, and I'll talk about that later. We have implemented acreage and lot size, and we're now in the monitoring phase of our CAPI workload optimization. So I'm going to talk about those in a little bit detail right now. Just before I talk about CAPI workload optimization, I'm just going to remind you that every monthly panel we have 12 monthly panels, has 3 months of data collection. So the first 2 are for self-response. The last month is for CAPI interviewing, computer-assisted personal interviewing. That's what this project touches. So at the beginning of the CAPI month, we run a model using administrative records data and different data as inputs to identify the housing units in CAPI that are likely vacant. The top 1% of that model become eligible for stop work. After a field representative has made 2 contacts, try to get to that household, we remove it from the workload with the idea that, okay, we're going to go ahead and remove it. It's most probably vacant. We're going to give this FR more time to work the likely occupied households. On average, this process stops about 0.15% of the CAPI workload, but which isn't a lot. Most of them end up being vacant. So it gets them to see that household quicker. So it does save time. The next project began in June of 2023, which is it's building on the likely vacants. About 15 days into the CAPI month, we run 3 models to identify more cases to remove. The models are run on the remaining incomplete CAPI cases that are not likely vacant. So each month we give the interviewers 10 full days and 2 full weekends to work their caseload before we remove the cases that are identified by these models. On average, this process stops about 3.6% of the CAPI workload each month. So to identify the cases that we stop, we use 3 models that work together to find the point where we can maximize cost savings for small hits on data quality. So the quality model uses administrative record data to understand the characteristics of responding households compared to those who have yet to respond. The response propensity model uses accumulated Paradata to predict response. So these two models work together to allow us to identify cases with a lower probability of responding and a higher probability of having similar characteristics to other households that have already responded in a certain geographic area. The cost model uses Paradata and cost data to predict expected costs. So that helps us decide how many cases to stop. And this is geographically what that's doing. So by combining the three models, we identify cases in a geographic area that are overrepresented in the data and have a high likelihood of not responding to future contacts. So this allows us to minimize the impact on data quality while still achieving cost savings most effectively. The next project that was implemented January 2024. This is an example of the acreage question that's on the survey. We began using third-party lot size data to replace survey answers for the acreage question. It is skipped, or it was skipped in 2024 on the internet and CAPI data collection instruments when we have high quality ADREC data available. So there are cases where we made business rules, we looked at an error and we're like, probably this isn't the best county to use this data for. So we made it so that we won't use the data unless it's high quality and we really trust it. About 71% of all responding households in 2024 did not have to answer the acreage question. So maybe it's not big, but it's a start. This project is still in the implementation phase because we haven't published the 2024 data yet. The next project we're working on is the agricultural sales question. This question comes directly after the acreage question. And the question appears here on the screen. We just ask of people living in houses and movable homes on more than an acre if they have any agricultural products on sale at the property. So the only known federal use for this data is the Bureau of Economic Analysis uses it to create a distinction between farm and non-farm properties for their data releases on national income and product accounts. So we've been working closely with BEA to develop a model with, I think we have 4 different sources of ADREC data as inputs to predict farm, non-farm designation. We're proposing to publish a new data product that's a farm indicator alongside the ag sales question with the intention of hopefully down the road being able to remove that ag sales question. Because they're not really a one-to-one, we want to kind of wait a little bit and, just kind of, we like to take the conservative side, but we do eventually want to remove that question. This project is still in the simulation phase. So we're not quite to implementation yet. We're also doing some more research on sex and age. This is asked of every household member. The idea with this, I won't get ahead of myself. So the ADREC data were used to imputate sex and age for the 2020 census. We want to use a similar methodology. It's been done before, so we think we can pretty successfully do it. We did do some research in 2019 on this, but we want to update that research. We've got newer data now. We've got 2020 census. We've got newer ACS data. So we're going to use those and apply some lessons learned for a new simulation. Since we're still in the simulation phase, but our idea is that we'll use these to edit, may use them to edit responses, but more probably we'll use them to impute non-responses for sex and age. As I mentioned, we're also looking at some housing topics. Here are the topics: year built, number of rooms, bedrooms, heat, fuel, units and structure, and building type. We're still in the beginning phases of this, but the idea is they're housing level variables. So most likely we'll do the same thing we do with acreage, which is for the households that we have good data for, we'll skip the question in the automated instruments. Wow, that was quick. And I don't think I was as excited as Benjamin either, so I apologize for that. But here are the references to. We have published some of our research, so you can find it. We also mentioned a lot of this in the Agility and Action report. So that is all I have to present. Thank you.
I love the internal census banter and friendly competition. That's so exciting. No, thank you. You were great. The enthusiasm came through. All right, and we're going to wrap the last presentation with Luke Larson, also from the census, and on the low response scores. So I'll hand it off to you, Luke. Thank you.
All right. Well, I will try and keep the energy up a little bit, but I won't compete. Everyone is a winner here at the Census Bureau. So let's go ahead and get started. Hopefully I won't have any issues with my own presentation. Open. Okay, there we are. All right, so my name is Luke Larson. I am a mathematical statistician in the Center for Behavioral Science Methods at the U.S. Census Bureau. I'm presenting these long-awaited results of work that we've been doing for the past few years into looking at how to revise the low response score that Ben had previously shouted out for us. That is a key feature of the planning database, and we've been working really hard over the past few years to look into how we can make the low response score better and more reflective of a post-2020 environment. I'm presenting on behalf of my co-authors, Yasmin Garcia-Trejo, Fane Lineback, Eric Jensen, and many others in our team listed here also contributed quite a bit towards this research. Thank you all if you are watching today. Today, we're going to do a really quick overview of the low response score. Ben had already given some of the high points, so I can kind of skate past a good portion of it. We'll talk really briefly about the methodology that we used for analysis, showcase some very high-level results, since we only have like 15 minutes and just a few slides to show today. But we will showcase enough to point towards what we're going to be recommending as the model enhancements to be deployed on the low response score that we are working very hard to be able to deploy onto the planning database later this year. And then we'll talk about some next step research that we're going to continue to do so that we are always improving the LRS. But first, we're going to get started by talking about what is the low response score. Ben hit on all of these points really quickly, so I'll just be able to say that this is a predicted rate of self non-response to the decennial census. It was developed in the early 2010s based on Census 2010 and ACS 5-year data. It's an ordinary least squares regression model that takes 25 planning database metrics from Census and ACS. And regresses onto mail return rate. The idea is that we update the planning database every year with new ACS-based metrics, and so we then feed that into the linear combination that is based on this regression model to update the LRS every year as we get closer to the upcoming decennial census. So we had this 2010 based LRS model with the ultimate goal of trying to model and predict 2020 census self-return rates. So why do we need to change it? Why do we need to make revisions? It's in large part because 2020 census was much different than 2010 census. One of the key factors was that there were different self-response modes available for 2020 census, whereas for 2010, it was basically just mail or the paper questionnaire as your self-response mode. But the housing units in 2020 were directed to do either paper or telephone or internet, and many housing units responded by internet mode. So the very notion of self-response has a different definition for Census 2020 than it did for Census 2010. There are also revised geographic boundaries that we need to consider. The tracks and block groups in 2010 are defined differently than they are in 2020. And then there are some things, completely out of our control. The coronavirus pandemic had a impact on how we were deploying the census and how people were engaging with it. And there are also many societal, political, and cultural attitudes shifting around with regards to participation in the census. So many factors leading towards us needing to make a determination on making some modifications to reflect, what our current reality of getting people to participate in the census is. To this point, the Census Bureau put together a working group of like-minded researchers who were very invested in the notion of updating the LRS, and went right to it with exploring model improvement strategies, looking into different types of data inputs, and exploring what kind of predictive metrics we could envision as helping to identify areas that are more or less likely to self-respond to the census. Today, we are highlighting results from our first main push into updating the LRS model. It's been a couple years of delays with having some data access issues and other things out of our control. But eventually, we were able to get together the work that we needed to get done and are able to present some of this to you today. So this is our first pass effort at revising the national level low response score with what I like to call common sense low lift modifications. So we're identifying things that are make a lot of sense to put into the model, make some quick fixes, things that aren't going to take us a lot of work to deploy. And so we are looking at a variety of different model constructions to look at what we get when we run these different models and identify an optimal solution to recommend as the new LRS. We're continuing to do more work, and in the coming years, we'll be showcasing other types of efforts that are coming down the pike. But with regards to the modifications that we're talking about today, there is a class of modifications that we're doing for all of the models under consideration. And then there are modifications based on different types of predictors that we're going to be combining in different ways to look at different candidate models. The global modifications I have listed here, and some of this stuff is pretty basic. We're changing the response variable in the linear regression from the male return rate to the self-return rate, which is based on all modes. We are changing the tracks and the block group definitions to be based on 2020 census tabulation geographies. Prior to, they were 2010 tabulation geographies. And we looked at how we had transformed the original 25 predictive variables in the model just to make sure that those transformations still made sense with the new data. We did modify a fair amount of those, whereas if they were square root or log transforms, many of those are now logit transformations, but we didn't have to change too much here. Two other changes that we made have to do with how we are presenting the return rates themselves prior to modeling. Because the return rates are defined in percentage space, they're supposed to be bound between 0 and 100%. In a linear regression model, sometimes your fitted values and your predictions can exceed those bounds. So you may have negative values, or you may have values in excess of 100. And having to recode those to the minimum and maximum values creates some bias that we want to try to get away from. So what we're doing now is applying a probit transformation to the response variable, the self-return rate, prior to fitting the model. And then once we get those fitted values or predicted values when we're predicting, we apply a inverse probit transformation to those values, and then that's the low response score that we'll be publishing. And then the final thing that we are doing in terms of global modifications is one of our decennial-based predictors, which was the percentage of housing units with related children under age 6. It wasn't published on the detailed housing and characteristics file that we got all the other census variables for. So instead, we replaced that with the ACS-based version of that. So we just did a quick swap. It's the same content, but it's coming from a different data source. Now, those were the global modifications that we're changing for all the models under consideration. We have a number of predictors that are being considered for the model, and those come in 3 broad flavors. The first are new types of predictors that come from the planning database. I have them all listed here, things like internet access and percentage mobile homes, percentage living in group quarters. These are all items that had been identified in prior research as being highly correlated or had strong showings of high predictive value towards self-response rates. And so we wanted to collectively consider this group of variables as possible candidates for the new low response score. The next class of variables has to do with the contact strategy that was assigned to tracks and block groups for Census 2020. Housing units were pre-assigned one of 2 contact strategies, depending on which tract they were in, either internet first or internet choice. And the assignment of contact strategy was universal across the entire tract based on the 2010 definitions. But then when you crosswalk those to the 2020 definitions, you end up with some tracts and some block groups where they have both types of housing units. So to account for that information, we have 2 percentage-based variables that completely describe the contact strategy assignment information within each tract and block group. And we are collectively considering those 2 variables as another class of predictors under consideration for the model. I would note that currently this data is not publicly available, but we're working really hard to get this vetted and approved for public release so that it can be published on the planning database alongside the low response score later this year. And then the third flavor of predictors under consideration is we want to look at the impact of regional variation on the low response score. And to do this, we are considering 2 different levels of interactions, either census divisions, of which there are 9, and then the US states plus DC, which would be 51 geographies. And we just create a indicator flag for each of these geographies. And so we have models that are division interactions and models that are state interactions, where we end up crossing those indicator flags with our main effect predictors to get a whole bunch of interaction terms in our models under consideration. So from those 3 flavors of candidate variables, we've constructed a total of 12 model structures that we ultimately considered for this analysis, and we did this at the tract and at the block group levels. Now today I'm only talking about the tract, but I can just give you a preview now. The block group results are very similar to what we see with the tract. So focusing just on tract, we were able to construct these 12 types of constructions where we have going from upper left corner, our baseline model is we don't change anything except for those global modifications that I talked about earlier. And then we start considering, well, let's add the baseline variables plus those 7 new variables from the PDB. And then the baseline variables plus just the contact strategy. And then the baseline variables plus the new variables plus the contact strategy. This is the saturated or the full model that includes all the variables under consideration. We then do this for under no geographic interactions, under division level interactions, and then under state level interactions. And that's how we get our 12 models. Now, we did do this, our first stage of analysis under all 12 different models, and realized pretty quickly that we can trim this down from 4 to 12, considering just the baseline and the 3 different types of saturated models. Because we were getting a lot of very similar results when we were looking at all 12 of them. But if we pared it down to the 4 most likely models that we want to consider, this is what we're ending up with. And so this is what we're talking about today. Here are some selected model fit statistics at the tract level. So going down the list from ME0 is that baseline model I talked about, not changing anything except for the global modifications. And then the models getting more sophisticated as you move down the list. We see that all of these models have some pretty admirable model fit statistics. Those R-squares are pretty high. Even for the baseline, that is about 74% explained variance. For point of reference, the 2010 based model was around 55%. So even with not considering our other candidate variables and just doing these global modifications and changing the data sources, we are getting better model fit. So that's great. Go us. But we do enjoy more significant increases in model fit as we increase the complexity, going all the way down to the state level saturated model, the ST3 version, having around 63% explained variance. We did conduct pairwise F tests going from model to model to ensure that these changes are significant, and it turns out that they are. Here are some visual aids showing fitted value analyses. I've got some scatter plots of fitted values versus the response variables on the top row, and then some box plots in the middle, some histograms of the fitted values down at the bottom. The main story being told here is that there's not a whole lot of overall change that you can see, particularly in the box plots and the histograms. But when you look at the scatter plots, if you pay attention towards the regions that I circled, you see that under the baseline model, the ME0, there's a lot more scatter that we would deem undesirable, where there's a not much agreement between the fitted values and the response. And as you increase in complexity, the that undesirable scatter tends to dissipate, and you trend more of the cases towards the diagonal line that we want to see. So ST3 does perform a little bit better relative to the other variables, as you can, the other models, as you can see here. It's a modest change, but nonetheless, it's there. And then here we have some measures of central tendency. This tells the same type of story that when you look at the mean low response scores and their medians, they're roughly about the same as you compare across the different models. So that kind of showcases what we were seeing with the box plots and the histograms before. A more interesting story is told with the residuals. And here we've got histograms of the residuals where you can't say a whole lot of difference, but I can say that the distribution is a little bit tighter the more complex you get, going from left to right. At the QQ plots, I've highlighted areas where we want to see we would prefer to see a tapering of the sigmoidal shape to be a little closer to the diagonal line. And we do see that as we increase in complexity from ME0 over to ST3. The closer it is to that straight line, the better representation of normality we see in those residuals. And down at the bottom, scatter plots of fitted values versus the residuals. This is our check for constant variance. And of course, we don't see perfect constant variance, but we see a trend towards the variance becoming better with increased complexity. ME0 down at the left, you see there's much more of a pronounced wedge shape that I tried to describe with these arrow lines that does flatten out a little bit as you increase in complexity. And here we see, when you look at the means of the residuals, they are trending towards closer to 0, which is what we want to see. But the standard deviations tightening is a really nice trend that we want, as well as the skewness and the extreme kurtosis values also going down. We want lower numbers are better, and we see that pretty consistently as we increase the complexity of the model. So overall, we were finding strong showings of our saturated state interaction model, throwing in everything in the kitchen sink as having the best model fit relative to the baseline model that we were having under consideration. We found that the fitted values and the residuals alike did seem to favor the more complex models. And I don't have the findings showing today, but this will be in our working paper coming out later this year, that when we examined this output by key groups like divisions, by states, by relative population size of tracks and block groups, and also by contact strategy classifications, that we see similar types of findings. And I think there are some really interesting stories to be told when you really get down to that level of granularity. So our recommendation is for the saturated state interaction model as becoming the basis for the 2020 based national level low response score. It is a much more complex model than the other candidates, and certainly much more than the 2010 based model of years past. But the results are very favorable, and we feel strongly that this will yield better predictions as we get closer to the 2030 census. So for next steps, we're going to be continuing our analysis. We need to look at predicted values still to finalize our recommendation. A preliminary look at our analysis had gotten some comments from the Methodology and Standards Council about looking into some sampling error concerns related to the LRS values that we get. So we're going to be digging into some of that later this summer. Ultimately drafting a recommendation memo for decennial to approve the final method, and then we'll be working with the PDB production team to publish the low response score on the 24 vintage later this year. And then we have a whole bunch of other R&D as we continue trying to improve our predictive metrics and be able to better inform stakeholders, data users, and field planners for the 2030 census and other survey products. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a great rest of the conference for the next 20 minutes or so.
Thank you so much, Luke. And yes, presenters, please feel free to come on camera. We have one question here in our Q&A from Thomas Johnson. This is particularly for you, Luke. Was there a selection procedure to choose the variables that predict male response rate? What about for the inclusion of 7 or more variables added for other candidate regression models?
Yes, the primary 25 predictors in the original low response score had gone through a really interesting story. They don't have the time to tell today, but there was a very long process by which the original team of analysts had fielded a bunch of different types of models from external and internal to census analysts. And from all these different models that they were able to solicit, they made some educated determinations onto which of those variables ultimately made it into the model. The 7 variables that were added for this new assessment, as I mentioned before, that was on the basis of other types of prior research that had been done in years past. I did a research project with a couple colleagues a few years ago about the internet access variables, for instance, and I know that the PSRS effort was instrumental in determining some of those other items that we had included.
Great, thank you. I don't see any other questions, but I have a question for all of you. We have about 5 minutes if we want to give ourselves 30 seconds after that 5 minutes to get to the last session and close out. But how do you and your teams test out new ideas for these products and projects? You know, do you have internal focus groups? I know, I'm sure you brainstorm with your teams, but then at what stage, if applicable, do you reach out to external stakeholders? I'll start with Hillary since you went first.
Yeah, I think the nice thing about doing methods panel coordination is that we are part research, part project manager. And so we are able to get a lot of the people in the room that we need to talk to. So for something like the internet instrument, we have the programmers, we have the people who are in charge of data collection, we have the people who build the internet instrument, right? And so we're able to talk to researchers in CBSM, some of whom have been talked about today. We're able to sort of spitball and design what an experiment will look like in order to get the data to figure out what is actually better and what is an improvement.
I'm just going to say that for the planning database, we just rely on the LRS working group, Luke Larson, CBSM. They make all the great improvements. We just are the middlemen. We disseminate. So it's great for us. We're just production oriented, and they're more the creative masterminds behind everything. So I think it's a great relationship between our groups that we can rely on them for the innovation, and we work on more the production side. So I think between both groups, we have a good thing going with the planning database. So I just want to give a shout out to the LRS working group and CBSM and others at Census that do a great job of improving this product.
And we're always happy to help with that.
For us, I will say for the CAPI optimization, it came down to we had a need, and CAPI costs were going through the roof, and we're like, we got to do something. And so it was necessity was the mother of invention there. And for the other stuff, we know our topics and who our stakeholders are. So we just, meet with them and look at what data is available. So just kind of work it that way.
That's great. So even with all the teasing of the internal competition, I'm quite impressed with the teamwork as well. And it's great to know again what happens behind the curtain. So I appreciate you all. Thank you for all your presentations. I don't see anything additional. Let me see if there was something in the chat that just came in. I think Ian Answer has an additional contribution to Thomas's question, but I don't think that's additional questions for us. So if we don't hear anything else, I think we'll give us 2 minutes to head out to that final closing. Thanks for a long day. Sorry again for presenters for the technical issues, but we really appreciated your time and your work, and we look forward to seeing the final pieces if you're publishing something in the coming months.
Thank you, Trisha.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.